Most of the advice you hear about quitting is wrong. People tell you to set big goals, stay motivated, push through. But if that worked, you wouldn't quit the gym after 3 weeks. You wouldn't abandon the journal after 5 days. You wouldn't start over every January. Here's the thing. The Soviet sport system didn't care about motivation. They cared about systems. Between 1952 and 1988, Soviet athletes competed in 9 Summer Olympics. They finished first in the gold medal count at 6 of them. Not because they wanted it more, because they trained smarter. And a big part of that training was psychological. A man named Avsenty Puny built most of it. Puny was the founding father of Soviet sports psychology. He worked at the Lesgaft Institute in Leningrad from the 1940s until his death in 1986. His system had 2 layers. The first was long-term personality development. Things like goal-directedness, determination, persistence, self-regulation. The second was competition-specific readiness. He called that boevaya gotovnost, readiness to fight. 5 components designed to put the athlete into the optimal mental state right before the event. But here's what most people miss. Puny's long-term layer wasn't about competition at all. It was about building the kind of person who doesn't quit. And that's what this video is about. Not competition, not sport, the daily practice of not giving up. So here is what you're going to learn. First, a system for making any new habit almost impossible to fail. Second, a technique Soviet coaches used to keep athletes going when everything in their body said stop. And as a bonus, a simple sentence structure that research shows can nearly double your follow-through on goals. Let's start with the system. In 1964, a Soviet scientist named Lev Matveyev published a model that changed how the entire country trained athletes. He had analyzed the results of Soviet athletes from the 1952 and 1956 Olympics. Some hit their personal best at the games. Others peaked too early or too late. Matveyev figured out why. The ones who peaked at the right time followed a structured progression. Gradual increases in difficulty, planned over months and years. He called it periodization. Here's what that means for you. Periodization was built for sport, but the core principle is universal. You don't start at the top. You start embarrassingly low, and you increase the load on a schedule. Think about it like this. If you want to run every morning, you don't start with 5 kilometers. You start with putting on your shoes and walking to the end of your street. That's it. That is day 1. Sounds ridiculous. That's the point. The Soviets didn't care if day 1 looked impressive. They cared about day 60. A study at University College London tracked people trying to build a new daily habit. The researchers found that it takes significantly longer than most people expect. For simple habits like drinking a glass of water after breakfast, the median was around 66 days before the behavior started to feel automatic. But that number comes with serious caveats. It only applied to about half the participants who showed the expected pattern. For more complex habits, like exercise, it took considerably longer, and many people hadn't reached a plateau even after 12 weeks. The researchers themselves noted they were measuring the feeling of automaticity, not necessarily a true, locked-in habit in the scientific sense. The takeaway is not a magic number. The takeaway is that it takes weeks to months, and simpler behaviors stick faster. So design for that. Week 1, your habit should be so small it feels like nothing. 2 minutes of stretching, 1 paragraph of writing, 5 push-ups. The Soviet coaches called this building the base. In Matveyev's system, you spend the longest phase at the lowest intensity. Only after the base is solid do you add load. Here's where most people go wrong. They skip the base. They start at week 6 intensity on day 1, and when they can't sustain it, they think they lack discipline. They don't lack discipline, they lack a system. Now, what about the moments when you want to quit mid-session? You've started, you're 5 minutes in, and your brain says stop. This is where a simple technique helps, and I want to be upfront. This one isn't Soviet, but it fits perfectly into the Matveyev logic of starting small. It's called the 5-minute deal. You tell yourself, I will do 5 more minutes. That's it. After 5 minutes, I'm allowed to stop. No guilt, no judgment. Most of the time, you won't stop, because the hardest part was never the doing, it was the deciding. Once you're past 5 minutes, the resistance drops. Cognitive behavioral therapists have recommended this approach for years, and the logic tracks with everything we know about how starting is harder than continuing. But here's what makes the Soviet approach different from every other productivity system. Puni didn't just build habits, he built interconnected qualities. In his general psychological preparation framework, he identified several volitional qualities that work together: goal-directedness, determination, persistence, courage, self-initiative, self-regulation. He argued that you can't train persistence without also training goal-directedness. You can't build self-regulation without determination feeding into it. They are not a checklist, they are a web. Here's what that means for you. When you build your small daily habit, you are not just building one skill, you're training persistence. You're practicing self-regulation. You're reinforcing goal-directedness. Each day you don't quit, every quality in the web gets a little stronger. There's a concept from another Soviet thinker that helps explain this. Lev Vygotsky was a psychologist who worked in the 1920s and 30s. He developed something called the zone of proximal development. Originally, he wrote it about how children learn. The idea is that the most effective challenge sits just beyond what you can currently do, but not so far that it's impossible. Vygotsky designed this for education, not for habit building, but the principle translates. If your daily habit is too easy, you get bored and stop. If it's too hard, you get crushed and stop. The right difficulty is just past your comfort zone, not a sprint beyond it, one step. So every 2 weeks, add one small layer. If you started with 5 push-ups, go to 8. If you started with 1 paragraph, try 2. If you walk to the end of your street, walk around the block. This is periodization applied to your daily life. Gradual, planned, progressive. Now here's the bonus. In 2006, researchers Peter Gollwitzer and Pascal Sheeran published a meta-analysis. They looked at 94 independent studies. All of them tested one simple idea. What if, instead of saying, "I want to do X," you said, "If situation Y happens, then I will do Z." They called these implementation intentions. The results showed a medium to large positive effect on goal achievement with a Cohen's d of 0.65. That's a meaningful effect size across a very large evidence base. Here's what this looks like in practice. Instead of saying, "I want to exercise more," you say, "If it is 7 a.m. and I have finished my coffee, then I will put on my shoes and walk outside." The if-then structure does something specific to your brain. It creates a link between a situation and an action. You don't have to decide in the moment, the decision is already made. Puni would have recognized this. His entire system was built on removing hesitation before the critical moment. The boyevaya gotovnost state, readiness to fight, meant that by the time the competition started, every mental decision was already resolved. Implementation intentions do the same thing for your Tuesday morning. This is not a Soviet invention. Gollwitzer is German, Sheeran is British. But the underlying logic, pre-decide, remove friction, act without deliberation, is exactly what Puni's framework was designed to achieve. Different era, different language, same architecture. So here is your system. Start with a habit so small it feels pointless. Follow the periodization principle. Increase every 2 weeks by one small increment. When you want to stop mid-session, make the 5-minute deal. And write your habit as an if-then statement to remove the daily decision. Try this tonight. Pick one habit. Write it down in if-then format. Set the starting level embarrassingly low. And do it tomorrow morning. Drop a comment and tell me what habit you picked. Next video, I'm going to show you how Soviet cosmonauts trained their focus during months of isolation in space. And that method might be the most useful thing you've never heard of. That's it for now. Go build your base.